All right, welcome back to AM Live. We've been joined by Noordine Hagai. Noordine, your thoughts on Raila's remarks with regard to the U.S. envoy Meg Whitman? Keep your mouth shut.
First and foremost, apologies for coming late. But you know, I'll borrow from Diamond and Koffi Olomide once they said, one day awamji wamefika. And seeing that I'm a resident, so maybe I'm there live.
Let me tell you the only part about that song, the only part that I sing along is the wah.
So now, matters as Raila calls her, in quotes, rogue ambassador, I think he was responding to her. And anyone who lives in Kenya would have expected Raila to respond to her after what she said about free, fair, and credible. You know, free, fair, and credible is relative to everyone.
But guys, isn't it a good thing? Isn't it a good thing for her to come up and say that we had free, fair? Isn't that the goal?
You see, the context is, there are those who are still, they haven't healed. You know, this thing takes a process. There are those who still believe that the victory was theirs and they lost, all right? And they feel that some quarters did not support them, support a certain candidate, and that's why it's like they are gloating in their faces. And that's why Raila responded the way he responded. What I believe is that it's not new. This is what the US does. They have this big brother syndrome where they get involved in everything that doesn't even concern them most of the time.
Okay, but guys, Noordine, ukichomeka tunaenda kulilia kina nani?
You see, this is it, right? This is it. Let me tell you. You see, the problem is, yes, she has a right to say whatever she says. Okay, that's fine. But Raila also has a right to respond in the way he responded because he feels aggrieved. So no one can tell Raila what you said was wrong and then congratulate the ambassador. Those who feel like the ambassador did right, that is according to them, they support her. Those who don't support her will align with what Raila said. At the end of the day, what we are saying is, yes, the US can speak whatever they want to say, but they cannot force their issues on us, for example. Because if you look at that big brother syndrome is what most countries are suffering. You hear what Museveni is saying in Uganda. Courtesy of the fact that he signed that law, he's now suffering some issues of being told, oh, CGV funds and what have you. If we do not tell you how to vote, how to run your country, then why should you tell us how to do our affairs in our country? So at the end of the day, everyone can say whatever they want to say. It's freedom of speech. But, you are allowed to respond. And so in Raila responding, yes, some say some words he used were harsh, or rather, I think Hika who was saying someone of that stature to say shut up. Shut up is just normal. Like I can tell Edwin, shut up. It's just cool. Just keep quiet. You don't have to take it out of context. But I believe we don't have to boil it out of proportion. And I'm sure today, Gachagua will respond to Raila. It's just like that. She talked, Raila responded, and Gachagua will respond today. Just wait and see.
So it's interesting. It reminded me. I'll come to you, Ngugi. It reminded me of Will Smith when he told Chris Rock, keep my...
Yes.
There's also another twist to it. That one, I would love to say that I like what President Ruto is doing with the Pan-Africanism campaign, a silent campaign that he has been running. And I think that is in the same line that we should take this, that Africans can actually solve their matters. And this is an internal matter to East African community. It is an internal matter to the Kenyan community. It is an internal matter to Africa as a continent. So I think we should finally come to a point where we realize that actually things that concern us can be solved by ourselves. We have institutions, we have bodies within the territories of Kenya which have deliberated on this matter. We have the Supreme Court, which decided actually the elections was free and fair. And that should stop there. So I think any other opinion from outside depends on who is actually giving it.
If we don't want them to give an opinion, why do we invite them to observe our elections?
I think we also have limits, and that we should put in place that you are welcome to observe, just the same way we will go to Ghana to observe. But don't give too much of your opinion because
you guys,
we welcome them.
It's just something like you want to have your cake and eat it.
We welcome them to observe,
yes,
so that they learn best practice. So that in their elections, when someone like Hillary gets all the votes at least she can be declared president,
And
so that they can have a functioning system.
And actually,
That's
we
why
have
invite them to observe.
excelled in democracy more than they have.
Yeah.
That is the fact. That is a fact. That is
Because
the truth of the matter.
The United States, people vote, but those votes don't necessarily make you president.
Yes.
Those votes don't make you president. There's a college system that makes you president. So we invite them to Kenya to observe what we do, how we do it, and hopefully they can, and they have refused to carry best practice. And so there's nothing much we can do beyond that. All we can do is invite them, observe. If they refuse to learn from us, then it is up to them anyway. But
you guys have just made my morning.
Olive, just a minute, Olive.
You
know, people say that countries like the US are 100 years ahead of us. But it is actually interesting to see that during the last election, when they had a vice president who is female, who is a woman actually, they were really overjoyed about it. And the excitement shows actually we are peers after all. Because we are still doing the same year. We had a running mate who was a woman, and actually apart from just Wajakoya, or who else? No, everyone else had a woman, and apart from actually President Ruto. The rest of them, including Wajakoya, had a female or a woman running mate, which means we are actually peers, because when they get excited about it, we also got excited about having a running mate for a woman.
But even only just one more comment on that one.
Yes.
You see, there is the concept of sovereignty, where countries respect internal matters of other countries. But then again, there is the other aspect of sending in representatives into other countries to represent the interest of that country in the receiving country.
Yes.
So when Meg Whitman is here, she's representing the interest of the United States of America.
Yes.
And I'm a strong advocate of functioning systems so that there is predictability. When you try and compare January 6th, the insurgency on Capitol Hill in US, and what was happening at Bomas, just that the context is just slightly like dissimilar, but it is almost leading to the same thing, all right? Both were trying to contest the outcome of the election, all right? This one was Trump, and this one was the Azimio saying, shouting and everything. So these things, sometimes you find happening in contexts that can be argued in the same line. But then again, the beauty of democracy is that we have established institutions that can come in and adjudicate on these matters and find an amicable solution, so that now when somebody comes, because Meg Whitman can come and say, just as I had said, that this election of 2022 went through the Supreme Court of Kenya, and the court validated the election, and the president was declared beyond reasonable doubt. So it is a matter that was dealt with finality, and it is in law, and Wakil is here, he can confirm that. So moving forward, the representatives of foreign countries in this country should always be alive to the political tensions and the atmosphere in the country, so that when we are breeding a ground for negotiation and dialogue, they should be bringing in more fodder to feed into the conversation than try and divide the conversation itself. Because look at what the Kenya Kwanza leader, Kimani Ichung'wah, in the dialogue team responded to Raila. You would like, okay.
I saw it on Twitter. On Twitter.
Sure.
All right, Nurdin, funga hindo tuende mambo ya Tancourt ama enlightenment.
You know, the word is audacity, right? And that is referring to the West. You see, the sad reality is that we fought for independence and got independence in quotes that we celebrate every other day. But the truth of the matter is that we're still neo-colonization. That is why they control our politics, they control our economy, they control so many issues about us. That is why you see our brothers from the West, be it Guinea, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, are trying to find a way how they can break the chains from France. So we are still there as Africa, and that is why you see they have audacity to tell us whatever they tell us. But at the end of the day, I believe and I hope that the leaders in Africa will rise to the occasion one day and we're able to sort out these issues, where those who believe that they should tell us how to run our affairs learn to understand that they should respect us as we respect how they run their affairs.
You know, I'm still trying to figure out, what did Meg say that was so bad? Anyway, but let's take a look at the editorial cartoons. Star and Standard. On the Star has to do with what we're discussing. Before we call, this is Raila now, before we call on the international community to look into, and then after, okay? And then I will pull up the standards. But even as I do that, gents, on the front page of the Star, there was a question of turncoats, siasa, the pullout, right? Political turncoats in Kenya's politics, epiphany or survival? I'll start with you, Jim. What did you make of Mutahi Ngunyi's reflections on the election period?
He spoke, again, he gave his opinion as an insider, an alleged insider. I cannot doubt the things he said, or I wasn't there. But it is a pattern. It is a pattern in politics that you see. That continually politicians have learned to survive. And part of surviving is you cannot stay out of the cold for long. You need to find a way to be relevant. Some of these people have gained their relevance by being in government, by advising government and things like that. It has happened all across the board. You know, Mutahi Ngunyi perhaps is the highest profile, but there are other people. You have people like Silas Jakakimba, for instance. You have other bloggers who are very popular for blogging for Azimio, who are now blogging for Kenya Kwanza. But to survive in politics, the nature of our politics, and I think we'll talk about this later, but the nature of our politics is extractive. Politics is a day job for some people. Politicking this is their bread and butter. And so when you're out in the cold, it means your bread and butter is at risk. Your livelihood is at risk. And so you do whatever it takes to be relevant. Let me give you an example. One time, the former Jubilee, he was the Jubilee Secretary General, who went and ran for a member of parliament seat in Kisumu. I forget his name. Onyango Lo. TNA. And Onyango Lo made a sensational claim at a press conference, and he said, I have come with a briefcase of files. I know everything about them, and I will tell you everything about them. And it endeared him to this side, and guy said, okay, if he was an insider, then he must have know a lot more, so let us bring him in. And I think the same thing is happening here. Mutahi Ngunyi will find his way into government. He's needed, I think he has certain skills that this government might need. And this government might need him to just declare that publicly, that he's no longer associated with Uhuru Kenyatta or Azimio. And then once he does that, maybe that was the interview. Maybe that was his interview for the job. And once he does that, then perhaps he passes his interview for the job. And then now he becomes, he gets into Kenya Kwanza. But it is not. People do that all the time. We do that in our jobs every day, where you have allegiance to one boss, and the next minute you have a new boss, and you switch allegiance. It's human nature. It is survival. And so there's this primal, it's an instinct within us to find a way of surviving. And you don't expect anything different from politicians anyway. They will equally do the same. Okay.
Ngugi, our political class are constantly accused of not standing on principle. You know, should we just resign ourselves to this as the nature of Kenya's politics?
I think it's just in our political DNA.
Do people have the right to change their minds?
They do have a right to change their. Actually, the only person who cannot change their mind is a fool. So from time to time, we are bound to experience this, and especially every cycle or every new term, or every other time after we have an election, we are bound to see some of these realignments. It's nothing new. So I think for him, it's good for him, politically or business-wise, or whatever it is. But there are two things here to look at. And one of them is that there are bitter truths that must be said. And then there is survival in politics. And for him, unfortunately, I think it's both of them. So I will just leave it at that, because there are things that I should not get into. But I think there are bitter truths that must be said, and especially about the past campaign. There are bitter truths that must be said. But for him, it's both of it. Survival and the bitter truth part of it. Okay. So that is my opinion on it.
Edwin?
Well, Nelson Mandela said, a man who changes his mind depending on who he's dealing with is not worthy of leading a nation. But then again, it is not bad to change your mind, most especially if your decision to change is guided by facts, logic, and detail, and not just to suit a particular end goal. So Mutahi Ngunyi is well within his right to find a way and survive in this political turn of events. And I think he's trying to play victim here. You know, like, first of all, he's exposing the issues that Azimio are dealing with. And that doesn't rub very well, because what will stop him again from exposing the issues that the current administration is dealing with when that time comes? So, first of all, this is somebody you cannot trust, all right? They have left Azimio because Azimio lost. They did not do their due diligence. They were in power, controlled everything, and were beaten free square by President William Ruto. So right now he's coming crying and saying that, no, I want to go back to government. I want to work with William Ruto. Like, I like this guy. But then again, he's still pledging allegiance to Raila Odinga. You know, like, I like Babaman. So you cannot come to William Ruto and still pledge allegiance to Raila Odinga. You know, so who are you? You must identify yourself. And I think he's a seasoned political analyst and well-learned fella who should be knowing what to do. He's a big person in this field. He should be knowing how to move his cards. And as his juniors, we're looking up to him, and can he provide us with direction? And you cannot say we are fully persuaded that we want to follow his footsteps. But then again, everybody will have to run their own race. Okay. And in this government, and he picked up a war on Twitter with Abdullahi Nasser, and they're, you know, sharing some exchanges on Twitter. Ahmed Nasser is having reservations about Mutahi Ngunyi's viability in government, but then again, Mutahi Ngunyi is saying, "I've come and I wanna work with this government."
All right, Noordin,
yes.
One of the tweets that greeted the conversation around this was this one by Charles Onyango Obo. Quote, political harlot is a uniquely Kenyan expression derived from the archaic noun for a prostitute, mostly confined to the Bible these days. It fell out of popular use almost 40 years ago, but Kenyans like it because used this way, it is a devastating insult. Your thoughts?
You know, I can't disagree with that statement at the end of the day, because he calls himself a dog of war. You know, every dog has a master. That tells you whatever he's doing is not on principle. It's meant, it's something they call it in politics, tumbocracy. It's more or less, he's in the cold season. You know, when you're used to being in government, there's a certain access to power, access to tenders, access to money that you're used to. Now, if you don't have that, some of them get a cold, like the one I have right now, but mine isn't courtesy of that. And so they find themselves now trying to tell us how his wife is a Kalenjin, TMI, we didn't want to know that. How he loves Ruto, we could care less. How he loves Raila still, we could care less. At the end of the day, just file your application, and I'm sure the president will go through it and decide whether or not to have you in his government, or rather to have you as an advisor. But if he does, he should know that, like Edwin rightfully says, if he can betray the same people he was with, just so that he can survive and continue enjoying what he's enjoying, what stops him from doing the same or selling out to those who will take him up? You know, and that's why I'm saying I don't disagree with Obo. That's perfect.
All right.
But you know, they're not telling us anything. He's not telling us anything new. That's one of the things. If you've read Kanchori's book, it's more or less the same thing. If you've followed the tweets and conversations by Boniface Mwangi, it's more or less they're telling us the same things. And number one, I am bent to believe them. If a lot of people are saying the same thing consistently about the Azimio campaign and secretariat and what went wrong and what happened, perhaps there's some truth to that. And so there's nothing. I think he's not told us anything new per se. But number two, looked at it in context, you realize that this is what most of our politicians do. It is the politics of interest versus the politics of principle. That when it is their interest during an election time, their interest is the people. And so they come to our homes, they come into our hearts, they come into our houses, they go onto our bodabodas, they climb onto our matatus, they walk on our roads with us because it is in their interest, and they listen to us in our marketplaces. But once they get elected, then their interest immediately shifts. in their interest at that particular moment becomes self-preservation and self-entitlement and self-enrichment. And though they go on that tirade for like 5 whole years and then come back to us again every 5 years. And so while we can excuse people like Mutahi Ngunyi because we did not elect them anyway, they are private citizens who are free to do as they will in this market. We have seen this. It is very symptomatic of what our politicians actually do every day. And for them, we cannot excuse them because when their interests do not align with the interests of the people, then there is a problem.
Okay.
Olive, there's something I wanted to say.
Yeah.
And you see, the sad reality is that these tankos, as you call them, would have been high-ranking officials in Raila's government if he would have been president. The Mutahi Ngunyis, the Sabina Cheges, the Kanini Kiagas, the Jaka Kimbas. Those would have been the gatekeepers of that government. But now it's interesting that now they give us revelations that we could care less about because we've moved on as a country. And so they should just file the applications in silence and see if they go through. I think that the others have succeeded. I think he's the one pending and many others because the bloggers already went in, some of them. So I think he's seen that his application hasn't reached the table, so he's taking it to Twitter. Maybe now it will be brought from the archives, and maybe they'll go through it.
But there is also another way to look at it.
Briefly, because I want us now to move along to devolution.
I think I agree with what he says because the consistency also in what these people are saying actually says something about what we had in the previous election. But there is also another way to look at it, that if you see someone who has seen as the only alternative maybe to shout to the entire world, then it means that in the tables that he should have been listened to, he was not listened to. And which explains also that all these other stories that we hear from Kanchori, from Professor Kagwanja, who was a very prominent person within the campaign of Azimio, are matters that should be taken with weight, not for the entire country, but within the campaign of Azimio for the future. So I think there is also a part for Azimio to look at and see what they can do next in the coming elections, maybe.
Right. Munasema anatafuta kazi. Ahmed Nasir Abdullahi posted this on Twitter. Like a drug addict exhibiting symptoms of acute withdrawal, Mutahi Ngunyi is teetering like a headless chicken hawking juicy gossip about His Excellency Uhuru's State House because the staggering 12 million shillings per month salary Uhuru put him on and paid for by a security organ isn't hitting his bank account anymore. And let me see, Mutahi is shamelessly gossiping about his former employer and thrashing the candidacy of Raila, all in hope that President William Ruto will give him a hatchet job and appoint him a Rasputin. I personally don't think that this state of affair is a good reason for Mutahi to make a fool of himself by telling us that his wife is a Kalenjin and he has come back home, or that President Ruto was not allowed to use certain toilets at State House. Mutahi knows too well that the UDA government has created excellent opportunities for Kenyans like him, and the BA and MA degrees he holds can easily land him a respectable job in the communication department in many county governments. So this was the violence that was exhibited on Twitter. Okay, let us, we'll have to put off the discussion on Finland and get now into the question of devolution. The editorial cartoon, the standard was this, you know, the comparison, same thing, front page of the Daily Nation. You know, BBI season 2 is just these bipartisan talks an avenue to reintroduce some of the proposals that were contained in the BBI, and that's why we have, I mean, I suppose that is why the Standard went with this editorial cartoon. You know, when you go to the opticians and they put on the letters and they tell you, okay, read, you know, the bipartisan, are you reading? BBI. Okay, so, and this has to do with devolution. You know, you referenced the Nyani,
Haoni Kundule.
Haoni Kundule, that was referenced, that was
Raila's.
Yeah, Raila repeated several times yesterday at the devolution conference. So, first, just generally, speaking generally before we get into specifics, has devolution cured the imperial presidency as envisioned in the constitution, Jim?
To some extent, it has. But, you know, just for context, remember when we were during the clamor for this new constitution, one of the things that we battled with was whether we wanted a presidential system or a parliamentary system. And devolution looked like the midway. It says, okay, could we maintain a presidential system but have a devolved system of governance? Because the idea was if we had a parliamentary system, which at that time, the proponents of a parliamentary system said it was one way of ensuring that we removed all power from the presidency and that parliament would then eventually have the right to vote for a prime minister who would be the head of government, and that there would be a president who would be voted in by the popular majority, and then you'd have a devolved system. And so that way, you have a president who is a ceremonial head of state. But of course, that did not go through because the people who were heading those talks had presidential ambitions, and they saw themselves in those seats. And that's what happens when you make election policies with yourself in mind. And so then we ended up with a presidential system, and they call it's not a purely presidential system, but you have this 47 different devolved units. And one of the ways that we said we are going to do it is then we will distribute, we will devolve not just power, but we will also devolve resources. Now, you look at between 2011 to date, you look at all the subsequent budgets that we have made, because the only indication as to whether we are actually devolving power and resources is the budget. How much money are we putting into the devolved units? In the last election, about 3 trillion budget, you had about 385 billion going to the counties. That's about 10% of the budget. And then you had maybe another 2.1 trillion going to the executive, which is headed by the president, which is about 60% of the budget. Now, he who controls the highest percentage of that budget ultimately has all the power, because power is not wielded without resources. It's not, you don't wield power without money. And so the only way that you're able to keep a lot of these governors in check is you maintain a sizable chunk of the national resource at the executive level, headed by the president, and then you give a piecemeal, which is the 10% to the counties. Of course, our constitution envisaged differently onto how much, at least a bare minimum, that we should have devolved to the counties. And so in my opinion, the way the constitution was framed, there was this idea that we were to actually remove this imperial presidency. The idea that a president had all the power to determine where development went to determine which region got a road, which one got an airport. And so that was to be taken back to the counties. But the same framers, if you looked at Schedule 4 of the devolved functions, the functions that they devolved to these counties do not show that they actually wanted to remove and devolve power from the presidency, because they devolved things like health, which is still contested, because you still have the Ministry for Health, which gets more budget than the counties combined. Then you have agriculture. You still have the Ministry of Agriculture, which gets so much resources at the national level than the counties do get at that level. And then you have ECD, you have betting, licensing, you have urban planning that were also devolved. So we did not devolve all the functions that we should have devolved to the counties. Functions like infrastructure development, roads. If we devolved those things, then it meant more money would have gone to the counties. Then it meant that the president would not then have this massive power to determine, because the way he determines this today is he comes up with, Ruto has a plan. It's called the plan. And so the plan is what we are all using to do all our national planning. So if in his plan he decides he wants to build markets for us, and there's actually budgets to build markets, by the way. We allocated money to build markets. So if he decides he wants to build markets, then you people look like you do not want to support the president, your region will not get a market, because the president will not come for a Sunday service in your region. And you know he only gives markets when he comes for Sunday services. And so the president will not give you guys a market, and then you guys will not have a market. But the regions where he goes for services every Sunday will get markets every time, because the bishops will request for it. And so the constitution shot itself in the foot. And that's why I have always been for this idea that we need to relook at the constitution. 10 years later, we have experimented with it. Wonderful things have gone on and we appreciate it, but there are certain gaps. There are certain draftmanship gaps that exist that we could perhaps cure as a people.
It's not just the bishops who ask for markets, the governors. You know, it's interesting because in Eldoret, one of these interdenominational prayer services you've referenced, the governor for Eldoret, for Uasin Gishu, Jonathan B, stood and asked the president to build for us a market in Eldoret. I mean, this is the governor, you know, and the president acknowledged that building markets really does not fall under their purview as national government. But he said, you know, I campaigned on a platform of Mama Mboga, so I cannot at this point come and abandon them. And then on the question of industrial parks, you have Wavinya Ndeti, Governor Machakos asking the president to saidie tupatie. You know, are we still in that imperial presidency that the constitution sought to cure, Ngugi?
Yeah, I think the constitution or the framers of this constitution did well to try and cure the imperial presidency. But on the other hand, it was unable to cure our minds. Because again, our minds are still in the old forms of how we play our politics. And to be in context, I will refer to Chapter 9 of the Constitution, and particularly Article 131 to 133, which explains well the functions of the president and even the powers of the president, which are much or less the same as what we had before. So, which means if this is a big if and not very impossible, a president came to power and was able to be influential enough to have a better part of both houses, to have a better part of institutions, even including the judiciary, through the powers that he already has, and is able to have influence even outside these houses now through the people. Then it means that this president is capable of making various changes that can be, no one can prevent. A case in point, we had the finance bill, which most people were up in arms against, but which passed nonetheless. And we had people saying that a government cannot be defeated, which actually is the truth. That is the bitter truth, because the Constitution was able to cure some of these things technically and legally, but our minds are still on the same place, and politics is politics. To some extent, we will say that politics exists besides and even despite of the law. So if we will have a very ambitious president who is a good schemer and who is willing to go all the way, then it means there are some things that he will be able to navigate, because even inside this constitution, there are loopholes that haven't been solved.
Okay.
So I think what needs to be solved is how we view politics and our culture of politics. Okay. Because without changing that, then the law does nothing. I will quote my party leader without even mentioning her name. Without even mentioning her name, who once in Parliament said that the law is an ass, and from time to time it must be whipped.
Okay.
So even this one, as far as we are concerned, and as much as we exist in our current political culture, then it means the law will always be whipped.
All right. I want us to take a break, but we'll come back with Edwin and Rudin's thoughts on this. You know, there's this in theory, in the Constitution of Kenya kwa hapa, and then kuna vitu kwa ground. Are the two disconnected on the other side of this break?
On Earthwise this week,
imagine your mom having to stay with her friends.
Tuko na miaka 5 nje. Maji iko huko. Sasa naridhi sit nini?
The road is literally next to us, but there is no way through because the lake, which is a little down there, has flooded the whole place, including the road.
we explore the drowning Lake Victoria region and meet the young people determined to make a difference.
This is an introduction, foundation to the family series. We need to know where it all began. That can only come from the book of God in the very beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. That formless darkness, chaos, in many ways describes many of our lives where we are at. But present with us always is the Spirit of God, in a sense hovering, looking to speak into our lives and to say, "Let there be light." And I pray this is what will happen in the family series. The areas of darkness that exist, we pray that God will say, "Let there be light."
Do not hold back in any situation. Enoch gets to work on the 6 symptoms of heartburn fast.
You do know you said all of that out loud, right?
If symptoms persist, seek medical advice.
Benefits of ordering with Glovo. Glovo allows you to order anything you want at the comfort and convenience of your home. Craving fried chicken or pilau or pizza? Easy and simple. Order on Glovo today. Glovo, order anything, we deliver in minutes. With Glovo you order anything unataka, and when you get it una celebrate because kukuchoma imefika, na wakati keki inafika ndio sherehe inaanza. Order Glovo, will deliver in minutes.
Welcome back to AM Live. This is a question we're asking. Has devolution cured the imperial presidency? And before we took the break, I talked about kuna theory and then there is practice. But this is what Chapter 11 of the Constitution envisioned in an effort to cure imperial presidency. The objects of the devolution of government are: 1, promote democratic and accountable exercise of power; foster national unity by recognizing diversity. Underline this part. C, give powers of self-governance to the people and enhance the participation of the people in the exercise of the powers of the state and making decisions affecting them. To recognize the right of communities to manage their own affairs and further their development. To protect and promote the interests and rights of minorities and marginalized communities. To promote social and economic development and the provision of proximate, easily accessible services throughout Kenya, to ensure equitable sharing of national and local resources throughout Kenya, to facilitate the decentralization of state organs, their function and services from the capital of Kenya, and to enhance checks and balances and the separation of powers. We'll get into separation of powers because there was a whole issue of making county assemblies autonomous to foster accountability, right, from the county executives in an effort to defeat corruption. But theory, practice. You had the president himself say, aside from the issue of markets, you know, the Mama Boga, I cannot abandon them. But Raila Odinga said, you know, this issue of markets, this issue of affordable housing, these parks, these are things that the industrial parks, things the county governments should be managing, but wanapangwa na rais. And rais says, anawapanga kwa sababu they were all elected by the same people. And the president has been very consistent in his message that he will work with all elected leaders. Your thoughts on the president's defense? Edwin.
Thank you, Olive. When you look at, as rightly you've displayed, Article 174 down through to Article 175 about the objects, and then you look at the principles of devolution. This was the original intention and still is of devolution. When you look at the issue of imperial presidency, the president was almost the law, and what the president says is what goes. If you do not agree with the president on any aspect of devolution, then your agenda is not flying. In these current times and circumstances where we have a democratic and moving constitution, we should be having systems and processes to determine what should be happening. If a devolved function has been done and resources have been seconded to it to enable the performance or administration of that function, then it is incumbent upon the sitting governor and the county assembly membership and leadership to ensure that that service as devolved is taken to the people. We want to talk about issues to do with access roads. Why should the president's word be the one to determine which access road is built anywhere? Why should the president's word be what to determine what level hospital to be constructed, or what facilities to be there, or what staff to be seconded to that facility? These systems should be working in I would say automatic way. You know, if the governors do not plan themselves, then they leave a lacuna where now the national government will come in and try and fix those loopholes. And when you look at sabbatical F of 174 on the word proximate, and that word is used deliberately because now proximate means something that is manageable within that county, and that explains why we still have health functions held by the national government. We still have agricultural functions, as my colleague Wright put, still under national government. So when you look at these functions, the principle also, there is the separation of power, but then again, there is the aspect of interdependence. So interdependence means where a county government falls short in terms of expertise, technical ability, or financial capacity, the national government would come in and try and address that situation. So moving forward, imperial presidency shouldn't even be the subject of discussion. What we should be discussing is when we, the people, are given a chance to elect in county leadership into position, are we going to make the right choice and pick a leader who would lead with principles of fairness, justice, the rule of law, and adherence to due process, so that when the governor comes to, you know, outline his policy framework and the agenda that he intends to do for the next financial year through the county fiscal strategy papers, they know what they're talking about. And they have whipped their MCAs well to realize that the resources we have are not for plundering, but to implement in order to deliver services for the people. So if you do not get your plan right, you leave a chance and a room for somebody from a higher position to come and plug that gap, because you are elected.
I'd like Nurdin to comment at that point. This whole issue, you know, is this an issue of the presidency, or is it that the county governors are just not up to the job? Because you know, somebody was saying here the other day that at the end of the day, if things don't move, if things don't happen, who will they ask? They will ask the president.
You see, you rightfully read Article 174 and 175. Now, in reading that, I'd like Kenyans to also read that in conjunction with Schedule 4 of the Constitution.
I will scroll down.
Now, Schedule 4 of the Constitution outlines functions of both national and county governments. And that is why you hear people talk about health, talk about agriculture, talk about things like housing and et al. Now, the problem is, the Constitution isn't the problem. And I hear people always blame the Constitution. Now, you know, coming from a lawyer, this is why now we come in, you know. You see, this is like our Bible. You know, let me come in. You see, the Constitution is express, and it outlines the functions of both levels of government. Now, the problem is the national government hasn't relinquished the powers that are meant to go to the county governments. And that is why the president is on record giving a promise or an undertaking that in 60 days, those pending devolved functions will have been devolved to the county governments. And that is why we have been asking, if health is a devolved function, why is a bigger chunk of the budget at Afi House? If things like agriculture are devolved. Why is a bigger chunk of that budget at the Agriculture Ministry? So at the end of the day, this is the question you need to understand. Now the problem is you've given examples of a governor asking for a market. That takes me back to the issues. We have people who seek these seats without understanding the roles of the positions they want to occupy. That is why, in giving context to this, that is why you have a member of parliament who will be elected in party Y and then wake up one day and say, by the way, I'm working with the government to bring development to my people, without understanding that they are an arm of government where appropriation is done in that same house. So the issue is people do not understand the constitution. Now, there is a commission in parliament that is tasked with the issue of making Kenyans understand. It's called, I'm forgetting the name. Tasked with making Kenyans understand the constitution and what have you. Because to be honest, most have never even seen a physical copy of the constitution. So at the end of the day, the issue is understanding the laws, understanding where your functions end and mine start. Edwin just talked about interdependence. Article 189 of the Constitution talks about cooperation between the national and county governments. And 189.4 says, where there is a dispute between the national and county government, they either seek negotiation, mediation, or arbitration. Now, we've had issues of revenue allocation. We've had issues of disbursement of funds. And the problem is that as we talk about a captured parliament, we now have a captured COG. And we have to be honest, because the chairperson of the COG comes from a certain political wing. And so they can only threaten, they can only bark but cannot bite. I dare say that the only time we had a serious chairperson as a COG chair was Isaac Ruto. And that is why he suffered the wrath of being a serious COG chairperson. Because at the end of the day, he was talking about those functions that yet to be devolved should be devolved. He was asking, why do we have a CS for devolution and we have devolved the functions? He was asking why there's something he used to do. He used to do this saying, Pesa Yende Mashinani.
Pesa Mashinani.
Mashinani. And from that, his political career died. Because they went after him, and we all know now where he is now, but we see he has gone back to the light and he has gotten something. At the end of the day, what we are saying is, we need a very serious and firm COG, because what we are seeing isn't what we need. Now, in the spirit of what is good for the goose is good for the gander, that we've talked about the national government. When we were talking about devolution, those who came up with the constitution, it was more or less when you talk about the imperial presidency, we were trying to devolve services to the people. Now the question we should ask ourselves 10 years later, have we devolved the services? Yes, there are certain success stories in devolution, but a majority of the things we devolved was corruption, number one. Number two, we devolved impeachment. Number three, ranks between the county governor and the MCAs. So at the end of the day, in as much as we also blame the national government, we also have to blame the county governments, because most of them don't understand their functions. Most of them are misappropriating funds. Already we are 1 year into their term, and we're hearing issues from different counties. We can see. So at the end of the day, the question is, do people understand the roles of offices they occupy? Number two, do they have an agenda to achieve, or is it just that when you get elected under a political party, like what we saw, we want markets, so we'll bring markets for you? It's like you don't have an agenda. The other problem county governments have is on-source revenue. They have failed to raise on-source revenue, because we have been told they are supposed to raise almost 210 billion. They raised close to 135 or 167 billion. So it tells you there are still teething problems 10 years post-devolution. I do believe we need to strengthen devolution. There are those who keep saying, do away with it. I say no. I think strengthen it, and also those who are found capable of misappropriating funds should be taken to book. But the sad reality is that if you can't tackle corruption upstairs, basement utaizana. It doesn't work that way. So in as much as we talk about interdependence, there also has to be goodwill. So the national government should let Schedule 4 come to life. Things like agriculture, which is number one there, county health actually be devolved. We've had issues where there are certain governors who are saying health should go back to the national government. I say no. I believe that what the framers of the constitution came up with under Schedule 4 should come to light, so that we can actually enjoy devolution and services go to the people. Because
so you're saying funding should follow functions? Exactly.
The entire reason for devolution is for service delivery.
Right.
And 10 years after devolution, we're yet to achieve full service delivery.
Okay.
Yes.
Sawa sawa. Jim, I listened to Anne Waiguru, and you've referenced some of what she said yesterday, and I got a little bit worried. She talked about MCAs, their terms being looked into. And she said something like, you know, Mr. President, if you resolve, it shall happen. Isn't that the SRC's mandate? And she apologized for threatening shutdown. And then she said, you know, you showed us a better way. You know, dialogue, which is good because we are not advocating for an adversarial relationship between the national and the county government, cannot work. But have these governors been brainwashed through delays in disbursement? Kuombaomba serikali.
So one of the things is a good way to you can either buy loyalty, right? You can give people money and they are loyal to you, or you can starve them of the money and so you make them loyal to you. So either of those two things works to gain loyalty. And in a Kenyan context, the governors have been denied money so many times that they have no choice but to be loyal. But if you look at a majority of our political class are remnants of the Moi era. Majority of them were either in the KANU youth wing, were either part of KANU, are either children of KANU, former leaders of KANU, are associates of KANU. A majority of them lived in that era and were mentored in that era. And the KANU Moi regime epitomized the imperial presidency. It is at that time that news would start with, you know, Mtukufu Rais, Baba wa Taifa. It is at that time that if the president passed by your village, you got a road, you got a school. That's why we have so many Moi girls schools, very non-Moi boy schools. But that's a story for another day. But that, now, I'm saying that just so that you understand where a lot of our politicians are coming from, including our president, leaders of opposition, all of them. They come from a place where the only way they have known the presidency is the Moi style of presidency. And so all of them, when they assume office, they still, whether they are governors, whether they are members of parliament, whether they are senators, they still view the presidency with the same level of fear, with the same level of adoration, with the same level of unquestioned loyalty as was required in the Moi era. And so we are yet to evolve until we face out those guys. And unfortunately, even those younger fellows who are coming up are being mentored by these same guys. And so we'll be in that state. But remember, Kenya for a long time was called the Imperial British East African Company. In fact, it was a company. This was a company. And so when you hear people talk, about shareholders, I'm just trying to give context so that you understand where some of these people are coming from. When you hear people talking about Kenya being a shareholding, situation, it is because from their understanding, being proteges of the administration, they knew Kenya as an Imperial British East African Company.
Yes.
And that in this company, whoever was the head worked outside of the law. Because that is what is, when you talk about imperial presidency, you're talking about a president who is acting outside of the laws or outside of the powers provided for them by the Constitution. For instance, you have a president who decides they want to appoint 50 CASs, right? The law does not give them such powers. The law does not provide such things. But because they feel they're outside of the law, they can do that. You look at our former president, Uhuru Kenyatta, who was also a very good student of an imperial president. He defied all court orders, so many court orders. He refused to appoint judges. He refused he would create his own delivery units within State House and appoint people and put them on taxpayers' payroll. And these people would actually be the ones running government apart from the cabinet. And so at the end of the day, we might have what was prescribed in the Constitution. But I think our mindset, we are still locked in the colonial era because that is what we inherited. We inherited an imperial regime, an imperial system. Our first 3 presidents were by all definitions imperial presidents. Our last president were to a large extent, an imperial president. And again, I say that because he acted outside of the law. President Ruto has shown signs that he could also act outside of the law, that he could give himself powers. Because when you talk about acting outside of the constitution, we are saying acting outside of the powers that we, the people, gave to him. So if he does anything that we, the people, for instance, if we, the people, say we don't want the finance bill, but the president insists on giving us a finance bill, you are becoming an imperial president because you are acting outside of the will of the people. And so I think we might talk about this till the cows come home. But until we change the psyche, until the electorate, we start worshipping the president and start thinking that the president has all the answers to all our problems. That's why you hear statements like, we, the people of Nyanza, need to work with the government of the day so that we get development. Until we come out of that thinking, until we come out of that thinking, the imperial president will continue to exist because we, the voters, are promoting an imperial president.
Yeah. All right. Ngugi, is it a case of the public having no confidence in the devolved system of government? And I ask that because, you know, when during these interdenominational prayers, the president anasemanga, nimewasikia, wajumbe wenu wameniambia shida ni gani, tutaangalia budget, hii barabara ya sijui wapi kwenda wapi. You know, maybe some roads are under the national government, so I will not contest that. But, you know, I mentioned this thing of governors asking for markets, industrial park, give us, you know, give us. Is it a case of, it's back to mama, it appears to me, you know, a case of mama na, tukisema serikali tunamaanisha nini? National government, mama na baba.
So I think, just as I had said earlier, it's a case of trauma, or political trauma. Just the same thing that my brother is talking about. That we have an existing political trauma, even among generations starting from even our generation going backwards. And because of these political traumas, there is only a particular way that we can relate with the presidency. There is only a particular way that we can relate with our heshimiwas. And so unless that is cured, I think we still have a long way to go. And I will take you back or even give an example of my area MCA to show you that this is not only about the presidency or even governors. But even down there at the level of the MCAs, one of the former MCAs from where I come from once told the people that Mnaona went to a bus park that was being constructed and said, Mnaona nimewajengea hii na nitaendelea kuwajengea zingine. But actually these people do not know that that is a project that was under the World Bank. And World Bank working together with, in cooperation with the county government. Everything is perception. Now from there, they are likely to elect him back because they will say, huyu alitujengea bus park, alitujengea mabypass huku, na ni MCA. So I think because of that perception, all other politicians, and not even the president alone, must continue whipping the same narrative. So that you continue seeing it that way. That mnaona nitafanya hivi, nitawajengea hivi, because that trauma emanates from the people. But if it were not from the people, and the people are well informed, and that is the need for what we are doing outside the political spaces and organizations such as which I come from, that educating the people to understand what is the role of the government and what is the role of the county governments. What is your role as a citizen? Are you able to call for accountability from even your area MCA and your governor and your president? I think that is the whole issue.
All right. Edwin, you know, when the president was speaking, he said, you know, referencing this trauma, that he committed to timely disbursement of monies owed to the counties as per the schedule. And he said he did so already. He ensured by the end of the last financial year, any and all money that was owed was paid. He said as of July, they released the money in good time. He said in 60 days, we will transfer all the functions that are pending, right, that remain to the county governments. Hearing him speak like that, are you optimistic that we will actually begin to enjoy the full, ripened, juicy, delicious fruits of devolution?
The success of devolution is not an event. It is rather a process. And when I was listening to the president, he was speaking from an advisory point of view. He said, I have been advised that in the next 60 days, the remaining functions will be transferred. So that is a negotiative position, all right? It's not very much authoritative, but given that it is coming from the head of state, there is a lot of authority to it, and the involved persons will work around the clock to ensure that they deliver as the president said. And Olive, now when we want to go even deeper into these devolved matters, you realize that devolution in Kenya is a concept that first of all was received with mixed signals. There was excitement, there were fears, there were, you know, everything that would come with change. And change will save people, change will some sort remove others from the spotlight. And those who are for the imperial presidency thought that with devolution, we are going to lose out on some powers and privileges that ordinarily we have been enjoying. So these would make some people in some other quarters be slow to fully implementing these devolved functions. But now, when devolution is here in this country and it's 10 years right now, you want to ask yourself, what is it that the national government and the county governments are doing to make sure that this is indeed a success as the constitution is providing? And you want to ask yourself, what is the place of the private sector playing in the success of devolution, be it in the sector of education, be it in the sector of agriculture, be it in the sector of health? You want to ask, what are the specifics that we, the private sector, are doing? And Olive, if you permit me, yesterday I was walking in Rongai and I came across a facility. It's called Kana. It's a level 5 upcoming facility. You want to imagine the kind of play in the private sector is bringing into the sector of health. And I think once this facility is complete, it's going to revolutionize service delivery and complement the existing services in that area and in many parts of the country. When you're talking about agriculture, we are grappling with the issue of unemployment because we're not innovating enough to the capacity that we have. Because look, Kenya is ranked among the most innovative countries in Africa. So why is it that we're still grappling with the issues of unemployment, yet we can incentivize county governments, the national government through respective line ministries can ensure that we have enough capacity to enable our young men and women graduating from TVET and university institutions to ensure that they have something to do and not just sit and look at their papers and you know, feel frustrated about the whole thing and try to make education look substandard. And Olive, this promise of devolution, if not that some politicians are twisted and crooked, this right now would have put Kenya on even a bigger pedestal. Okay. Because look,
all right, Edwin, I'd like to have Nurdin come in at that point. Nurdin, it's like people don't know the functions of the county governments. Let's look at the constitution. Agriculture, so Schedule 4, which you referenced, agriculture, including crop and animal husbandry, livestock sale yards, county abattoirs, plant and animal disease control and fisheries, county health services, including in particular county health facilities and pharmacies, ambulance services, promotion of primary health care, licensing and control of undertakings that sell food to the public, veterinary services, excluding regulation of the profession, cemeteries, funeral parlors, and crematoria, and refuse removal, refuse dumps and solid waste disposal, control of air pollution, noise pollution, other public nuisances and outdoor advertising, cultural activities, public entertainment and public amenities, including betting, casinos and other forms of gambling, racing, liquor licensing, cinemas, video shows and hiring, libraries, museums, sports and cultural activities and facilities, county parks, beaches and recreation facilities, county transport, including county roads, street lighting, traffic and parking, public road transport and ferries and harbors, excluding the regulation of international and national shipping and matters related thereto, animal control and welfare, including licensing of dogs and facilities for the accommodation, care and burial of animals, trade development and regulation, including markets, trade licenses, excluding regulation of professions, fair trading practices, local tourism and cooperative societies, county planning and development, including statistics, land survey and mapping, boundaries and fencing, housing and electricity and gas reticulation and energy regulation, pre-primary education, village polytechnics, homecraft centers and childcare facilities, implementation of specific national government policies on natural resources and environment conservation, including soil and water conservation and forestry, county public works and services, including stormwater management systems in built-up areas, water and sanitation services, firefighting services, disaster management, control of drugs and pornography, and 14, ensuring and coordinating the participation of communities and locations in governance at the local level and assisting communities and locations to develop the administrative capacity for the effective exercise of the functions and powers and participation of governance at the local level. Let me catch my breath. But here we go. I just wanted to reference the principles further back up, chapter 11, 170. Here we go. Here we go. Principles of devolved government. County governments established under this constitution shall reflect the following principles. County governments shall be based on democratic principles and the separation of powers. County governments shall have reliable sources of revenue to enable them govern and deliver services effectively. And C, no more than 2/3 of the members of representative bodies in each county government shall be of the same gender. Are we without addressing the question of financing, monies, can we then speak to what is this? The separation of powers to the extent of an imperial presidency? Because I was listening the other day to an Engaged talk. What's his name again? Nzioka Waita, and he said he has been in rooms where development is determined, right? Development projects are undertaken, and unless you are represented, you know, essentially the level of development you will attain is limited. I had also in studio the other day a gentleman who served as the PS Justice Ministry when devolution was taking shape, Gishira Kibara, and he said more or less the same thing: budgets are power. And has that been the way the national government has kept devolved units stunted, Jim?
True. And you know, when you listen to a lot of these so-called insiders, and then you also look at the history of marginalization in this country, and areas that we consider marginalized, then you know for sure that the only reason why those areas have been marginalized is because they have not been in those rooms where power, where decisions were being made, where the national cake was being divided. And it goes down to basic things like jobs in government. Who gets the lion's share of jobs in government? You know, recently, I think it was KRA who did some recruitment, and 60% of the jobs went to 2 communities. And you realize that is a subtle way of telling you that that's why the presidency is a do or die situation in this country. Because whoever becomes president ultimately determines where money is going, where quote-unquote development is going, where we are prioritizing to develop. And again, for me, they take the same form and shape as the colonial masters who said we will prioritize the White Highlands because that is where there's a lot more rainfall. And they had legitimate reasons to marginalize the rest of the country. And that's the same thing that happens with governments today. They get very good legitimate reasons to then marginalize a whole section of this country where you have areas where they will never ever have a road by the national government, same for the county government. You have areas where, you know, how many teachers are being posted by the TSC, how teachers are posted there. You have schools which have 1 teacher to teach 5 subjects, just because of such things. Ultimately, it is painful. It is a painful thing to swallow, but the truth is, we don't like it. It's not the way things are supposed to be. But whoever has power becomes the largest shareholder, and the largest shareholder determines where money goes.
It was interesting to listen to Pio Wandai the other day, and he said Nyanza Western, they're not receiving the fertilizer as the rest of the country, and he also brought up this issue of privatization of sugar mills. But the president also, I suppose also partly in response to that, he talked about how county governments, there are those who have enabled them to do last mile delivery of the fertilizer. So I suppose he was lumping some of the blame on the county governments. But as we close, because you are the Wakili, Nurdin Hagai, as you have told us,
what do I say?
Yes. So now there's this whole of bipartisan BBI, the comparisons. Yeah. Is it time do you think, because the theme of devolution is the present and the future, are we at a point at this stage to look at some of the proposals that have been made on how we can strengthen devolution? Because you said you're a proponent of strengthening devolution. BBI had talked about 35% of audited accounts not necessarily approved by the National Assembly and such like things.
You see, first and foremost, we have a problem. We have not done extensive civic education of the same constitution that we are celebrating. There are those, like I rightfully told, who have never seen a physical copy of the constitution. They don't even know what the roles of different people they vote for are. And so I believe, yes, there's nothing that is perfect, but what we have as a constitution is good for the people, but an ass to the political elites. Because it is more or less like an impediment to them. And that's why you see the famous BBI failed, because as they tried it, they met it in court, the constitution, it spoke for itself. That's the beauty about it. And that's why we love this constitution. Now, it has some lacunas and some loopholes, which is true. But I do believe in matters doing any amendments to constitution, they should more or less emanate from the interest of those people that are served under the constitution. That is the Kenyans. Because if you amend it on the whims of the political class, then what you're doing is they lead to the same constitution. Because if you check on the daily, we're talking about leader of opposition, we're talking about prime cabinet secretary, we're talking about 9 additional counties. That is not even among their mandate, because the boundaries, we have a way of how boundaries are done. Then we had the Ward Development Fund, which I have an issue with, and then we have the 2/3, which is okay, because they're trying to come up with the 2/3. Now, if you ask me, for example, Ward Development Fund, the MCAs want it because the MPs want it. The senators want it because the MPs want it. Now, why do we pay you to do oversight? And then now they want, you just showed us the principles that talks about separation of powers in county governments. So you want to have a governor, you want to have MCAs who are meant to legislate, represent and oversight, and then give them money for development. So how will they oversight? Will they be controlled? That is the question that we have. So you look at, we say, yes, the constitution has some issues that, yes, we have to look into, but it has to be more or less people-centric, as opposed to more on the political elite. There's something I have to say before.
Nurdin, bad time.
1 second. 1 second. Because, they said something about how the reason we have this issue about Mtukufu Rice is because of those people who are in government right now were in this old government. It's called political hangover. And we thank Major for jana kulienda haji.
Jana kulienda haji. Okay, leo kumenda hivi. I want to thank my panelists this morning. Ngugi Ndegwa, Executive Director of Stawi KE, Edwin Kegoli, Political and Policy Analyst, Jim India, Political Analyst, Nurdin Hagai, Advocate of the High Court. I will schedule a conversation on this separation of powers, how it will work in the counties, because that was an issue that was raised. See you Monday.